Sorcery was one of Conan Exiles' most wanted features, but since its addition, people haven't exactly been satisfied with the magic we can wield. It's not irredeemable, but what exactly is wrong with Sorcery and how could it be fixed? Today we delve into the arcane to devise what can be done. Firstly, let's take a brief look at the history and design, as I think that will inform a lot of the issues. Sorcery was long planned for Conan Exiles, but was one of those features that just never seemed to make it in until September 1st, 2022. The Age of Sorcery brought, of course, Sorcery into the game. This was something that really attracted a lot of people and brought Conan one of its biggest spikes in player numbers on Steam, but a few years on, people are not exactly happy with how Sorcery is. To understand why, I think we need to understand how Sorcery is designed. There are many ways to design a player control mechanic, and for Sorcery, Funcom chose to make it utilitarian, aiming towards practicality and not exactly combat efficiency. This philosophy is nothing new, and to be fair, it has its merits. For example, RuneScape 3 added necromancy as a skill, and it is almost entirely combat oriented. You can do almost all combat in the game with necromancy. However, Sorcery in Conan is designed for utility, similar to the Engineer from Team Fortress 2. The Engineer is rather unremarkable on his own, but through his special utility like the Dispenser, Sentry Gun and Teleporter, he is the epitome of a utilitarian design choice. His value comes not inherently from his existence, but from the things he can create. Utilitarianism was the driving philosophy of Conan's Sorcery. The devs didn't want you throwing fireballs like Skyrim, they wanted you planning ahead, doing rituals, basically using Sorcery proactively rather than reactively. That philosophy isn't bad, so why are people not happy with it? Becoming a sorcerer in Conan isn't too hard. Find a sorcerer's map, find the cave, grab the tome, and then grind up your sorcerer's spell pages to unlock spells, craft sorcery stations, and so on. It's easy to become a sorcerer, to cast these spells, make illusions and so on. The core problem though, I think, is that you never feel like a true sorcerer. The first aspect of that is undoubtedly combat integration. If you want to be an archer, an agile dagger-wielding rogue, a brutish barbarian, all of those approaches can be achieved in combat. However, if you want to fight as a sorcerer, you don't have a ton of options. It's doable, but far removed from the proficiency of a true sorcerer class, and even with the sorceress benefits from corrupted perks, you'll ultimately still have to swing your sword most of the time. It's understandable that some people wanted Sorcery to be a combat style, and I think that's mostly just disagreement on design direction, which is very fair. I don't mind it being utilitarian myself, but I definitely understand the argument. The second core problem, and really the exacerbating factor of the first, is that the utilitarian aspect of Sorcery is, in my opinion, not that deep. Some aspects are incredibly useful. The addition of transitory stones have revolutionised how players traverse the map, and the ability to mass cull all resources around you or summon your own corpse to your summoning circle are great additions, but those are really the only standout examples that come to mind. Spells like Ice Bridge, Bat Demon, Mirror Image, they're all fairly situational, and to be fair you can sink a lot of time into the game without ever really needing to touch them. If a system is utilitarian, it should entice regular use to expedite and augment common facets of the game, and I think that is the problem with Sorcery's design. There is no problem with having some niche spells, in fact I think it's good to have some, but most of them aren't super useful aside from a few standouts. People really don't want Sorcery to be just some sort of side thing they use occasionally. Conan is in the sword and sorcery genre, and the latter is just as important as the former. People want to fully immerse themselves in the sorcerer's ways. They want this to be something they use often, even if it is mostly utilitarian. At the moment, Sorcery is something you might dabble in. Very few will commit to a pure sorcery way of life. The reason for that is there simply isn't really enough there to pull them in. So how can Sorcery be fixed? Fixing Sorcery is a bit tricky. For the people that want Sorcery to be more of an actual combat skill, I don't think that's ever going to happen. The devs are pretty set on it being utilitarian. However, in that framework, I think we can make big improvements to the system without throwing fireballs or blasting ice from our palms. Firstly, the sorcerer archetype must be addressed. At the moment, the only real archetype of a true sorcerer is the glass cannon corruption build or the occasional utility piece. The style really lacks its own identity. However, I think it can be bolstered outside of those aforementioned styles. Corruption is a big trade-off to sorcery that I don't think should be removed, but that doesn't mean they can't have a role. In a clan, the sorcerer should probably be the support role. Their role should serve to create utility and bolster the abilities of themselves and others through rituals, crafting, potions, spells or more. As a solo player, it's a little more tricky. I think you'll always be at a disadvantage as a sorcerer if you're a solo, but that shouldn't mean you don't have options. Stealth, trickery, hypnotism, deception, and tilting the odds in your favour should be in any sorcerer's book of tricks, with the ability to prevent aggro, temporarily recruit nearby enemies, or avoid heavy conflict being a major part of their repertoire without the necessity of head-on axe swinging. The sorcerer, as a role, I think needs more identity and agency. Those two styles I just described seem to fit the role well, and I think you can bolster both of those proposed archetypes with the following changes. If sorcery is to be utilitarian, it should interact with almost every aspect of the game. Sorcerers should have the ability to cast ritual buffs for friends, debuffs on enemies, and augment equipment like armour, weapons, and potions. Sorcerers could work alongside alchemists to create magical potions that heal and prevent injury to those who drink it. The ability to temporarily negate status effects, knockdowns, or provide improved healing should be an integral part. Sorcerers should also work as enchanters, buffing armour and weapons. This could be done to provide damage bonuses against undead or demonic creatures, or humans depending on the circumstance. Additionally, sorcerers should also be able to augment weaponry and armour, adding buffs for corruption to bolster their ability of self-defense. If a sorcerer has to swing a sword, they should be able to have their own weapon, augmented by themselves to play to their strengths. That leads us into the next and probably most important point, and that is simply adding more spells. Sorcery in Conan Exiles has a really broad scope, yet at the moment it feels incredibly narrow. Exploring more of each magic school and adding more disciplines across the board can only be a benefit. The Khitan schools of alchemy and hypnotism in particular provide open paths towards new spells that can play into the utility mentioned in the prior section. Alongside spells, rituals and processes that just generally have more, generalised utility, some ultimate spells would also be incredibly good to have. This could be used to provide enormous temporary buffs or to call incredibly powerful spells like meteor storms, earthquakes or whirlwinds. At the core of it, sorcery is the ultimate power fantasy, and it should be reflected with incredibly complex and powerful spells. They should have the downside of basically taking the sorcerer out of the fight for the rest of its duration, but nothing makes you feel as powerful as wielding almighty power like that. I think really it should be the equivalent of summoning an avatar. That feeling you got when you first saw the Purge's meteor storm, that's how you should feel when you wield the ultimate sorceries. With the addition of companions too, introducing new sorceries through them seems like a great idea. I was rather surprised and admittedly disappointed when I found out Lu Fei didn't really teach you much about sorcery. It was a real missed opportunity. Companions and other NPCs around the world seem like the most natural way to learn these spells through the experience of other powerful sorcerers. Finally, the process. Sorcery in Conan Exiles is depicted as something dark and eldritch, where the most powerful sorcerers commune with gods and demons and thus harness the true power of the outer dark. For the player, it doesn't really feel much like that. I don't think there's much sense in changing the basic sorcery system of reagents for spells or crafting or some of the other processes we have now. They work alright. But if we're going to add super powerful things like weapon or personal buffs, potions and ultimate sorceries, they should have a deep path that you must navigate to access them. Be they complex rituals, communion with demons, conjuring items from the outer dark, those top tier aspects should have suitably immersive and demanding requirements. People want to be a sorcerer, they want to be more involved with it and immersed in sorcery. They want to feel like they're harnessing powers beyond our world, the power of the outer dark itself. Sorcery is full of eldritch malevolence, and that texture should be exuded in every facet, but especially its most demanding aspects. Ultimately, sorcery had, and still has, a ton of potential. We know we likely haven't seen the last of it, the story of Kurak and Metkamoses isn't quite finished yet, and when we do eventually return to it, it seems only right the developers will get a chance to look again at the mechanic and right the wrongs that it has. Sorcery isn't bad by any means, it just didn't quite live up to its potential, and with what I've suggested today, I think it finally can. Let me know your thoughts as always in the comments below. That will wrap us up for today. Thanks for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. If you want to see videos early and support the channel directly, consider joining us over on Patreon, link in the description and pinned comment. Take care, and I'll see you soon.